All right, guys, Rooster here in Tennessee. Got a JTG, my good friend Joe the Grinder, dual 4cx800 base amp sitting here in front of me. Two tube, steel tube amp, obviously. This is just going to be a discussion video, talk about it a little bit, kind of announce, and I'm putting it up for sale. A few things we're going to do during the video. I'm going to tell you the backstory of the amp, kind of explain the features on the amp, and then explain how exactly it works. The recommended drive and things of that nature. So I figured I would do this video separate than the demo because, gosh, if I include all that in one video, it could turn into a 20-something minute long video. And unlike some folks out there, I'm not here to make 20 and 30-minute long videos. I'd like to break it up. That way it's easier for the customer or the viewer or whoever to watch. So a little bit about the amp. Yes, it runs two steel tubes, 4cx800 tetrodes, which in the tube world basically means they're a low drive tube. This amp is screen driven, so it does have a screen supply in it. Has a high and low on the front. Also a variable dial-a-watt, which is unique to his amps. I don't think I've seen anybody else doing the 800s with a variable on them. I've seen some people doing high and low, but very few out there. I don't think anybody else I've seen actually use the variable. So amp has an input tune on the back and your plate and load on the front. You tune it for peak output, maximum output, plate voltage meter over there, and then your on and off switch. Now the high and low, I think the middle position is a standby, and then high being up high and then low being down low. But good running amp. The power supply for it, very heavy duty, capable of running 3 tubes. You guys can see 2600 volts DC at 3 amps. So you actually could run a third tube off of this if you ever decided to. The power supply turns on the switch there, the RF deck turns on, turns the blower on, and turns the filament on, and then you turn the high voltage on with the power switch. On the rear of the amp, you've got a ground cable that connects the deck to the supply, a high voltage lead that comes from the power supply to the deck, screws into the back on a million high voltage connector. And you've also got a 110 volt cord that plugs into the power supply. That way you don't have to run the deck off the wall. You can actually just plug it into the power supply and steal the 110 from it. I think it's 110. It could be 220. I think it's 110. But that way you kind of steal the 110 from the power supply. So the history of this amp. Okay, I always like to do that when I get in an amp. People like to know the history of it. Why do I have it? Why is it up for sale? People say, well, why does it have a brand new set of tubes in it? This amp is fresh from Grinder's shop. It's not a new amp, but it's essentially brand new on the inside. The person that had it before I got it overdrove it, and we'll get into that here in a second. They put twice the radio into it that it needed, flattened the tubes, destroyed the input on it, and Grinder spent about 5 hours working on this thing and putting new tubes in it. They had also got in it and monkeyed around with some of the wiring, done some things that weren't up to his standard. And he's one of those people, before it leaves his shop, he wants to make sure it's right, especially if it has his name on it. He's going to be very particular. He's had amps come in there from different builders that he just tells people out the gate, hey, it's going to be a complete rebuild, because if I'm going to put my name on it, I want it to be right. His stuff is no exception. He went all the way through it, spent a lot of time getting it right, and now it's a superb running amp. So how much power is it capable of? Okay, we tested it down on his bench. It did about 6,000 PEP and about 2,000 to 2,100 average. These tubes generally run at full output without putting them in a strain, 900 to 1,100 watts average each. PEP is going to be somewhere between 2,500 and 3,000 PEP. Now we'll talk about that for a second, because there are other people that are out there building these 800s, and I'm not here to throw off on anybody in particular, but I will tell you guys, there's a lot of people that are running these 800 tubes, a lot of builders, and when they build an amp around this tube, they are running the tube at full saturation. And what I mean is, it doesn't matter whether you hit it with a 25 watt radio, a 35 or 40 watt radio, it's going to sit there and basically do the same amount of power, max power. That is not the preferred method of running these tubes, I should say. The way these tubes operate, being screen driven and being tetrodes, if you don't do a custom input to the tube, they will basically do maximum power with like a watt going in. For those of you guys that are familiar with the LDMOS 50 volt, 60 volt MOSFET finals, those are kind of the same thing in the solid state world. They have to be customly attenuated, I guess you'd say, for specific output. So this amp in particular is set up for 10 to 11 watts average power. I do not recommend buying this amp if you don't have a bird meter. Again, I do not recommend buying this amp or any tetrode if you don't have a bird meter, because it is set up for a specific amount of power, and that's 10 to 11 watts average. Now, you can drive less into it. You put 9 watts in it, you're not going to have a big fall off, but preferred drive, 10 to 11 watts average, 35 to 45 PEP. The PEP, not as important. The average power, very crucial on this. Now, getting back to what I was saying about people building these amps that are in full saturation. So, the tubes are being fully saturated, rather. If you're messing around the tube world, you may see someone build, let's just say, for instance, a 2-tube one of these, and they show you this thing doing 4,000 watts average, 4,500 watts average. Okay, these tubes are capable of that, but not for the long run, not for longevity. They will do that kind of power, but you will be putting tubes in it, every couple of years if you're lucky. If you're unlucky, you'll be putting tubes in it once a year if you talk a lot. But at minimum, if you're anybody that talks any amount at all, you'll be putting fresh tubes in it fairly often. Joe the Grinder's amps, I've sold several of his 2-tube 800s, several of his 1-tube 800s. I have never, not one time ever, had someone flatten a tube in one of these. Now, I can especially say that I've never even heard of someone flattening a tube in one of these unless they have overdriven it. I can personally say for the ones I've sold, I think I've sold 5 or 6 of these between the 2-tubers and the 1-tubers. No one that's ever bought one from me has flattened a tube in one. But it is possible to happen if you overdrive it. Just like the gentleman that had this one before, he overdrove it. He put a RCI 2980 into it when it was set up for like a Cobra 2000. So big difference in average power. If you don't overdrive them, these tubes are basically bulletproof. They will last years and years and years. Would not surprise me at all to see 5 to 10 years worth of operating time out of a set of these tubes. Probably more than that. But that's just being on the conservative side, I guess. But it's a fine running amp. It's not for everybody. This is not the amp that you want to buy if you're somebody that runs 5 different radios. This is more for somebody like me that runs nothing but Cobra radios. Okay, I run nothing but Cobra 1000, Cobra 87, Cobra 29s, maybe a Cobra 2000 every now and again. For the most part, that's all I run. Unidens, things of that nature, you'll be fine. But if you're somebody that talks on a Cobra 1000 on Monday, and come Friday, you're hooking up a RCI 2980 or a Striker 955, this is not the type of amp that you want to buy. And I'm not saying that to be like a jerk, just like I said about the bird meter. I'm not saying that to be like rude. I'm looking out for everybody's best interest. I don't want to sell someone an amp like this, a very expensive amp. I don't want to sell somebody this amp and set you up for failure and tell you, oh man, you can hook whatever radio you want up to it, hook it to your dosimeter, you'll be fine, and you get it home and talk on it for a couple of hours and it blows smoke in a bad way. So when I say things like, don't buy this unless you have a bird meter, or this isn't for the operator that talks on 5 different radios, I'm not saying that to be a smart ass or anything like that. I literally just want somebody to get this and be able to enjoy it and not tear it up. So that's my kind of spiel on that. But it's a very nice amp, guys. It is going to be up for sale. I may put it up on the website. It'll be local pickup only. I'm wanting to do a test on it later this week. I need to put a different plug on it. That plug doesn't fit my sockets over here. I've got one type of plug that I use for everything. So for all my 220 stuff. So I need to change the plug on it. and get it fired up and test it. I'll probably test it with a Cobra 87, Cobra 29, something like that, to show you guys how it does. But a very good running amp, very, very tough. I mean, these 800s, I tell you guys, when they're set up like this, when they're properly set up, screen driven the way they're supposed to be, they are a very, very tough tube. They're almost indestructible. But, you know, just like anything out there, they do have a weakness, and the weakness of this tube, when set up in this configuration, is overdriving it. Okay, you can set one of these tubes up like everybody else does, and you can get away with driving it with more power. You can, you know, use a 15-watt radio, use a 35-watt radio, but your tube life is going to be immensely cut down when you do that. Again, I'm not throwing off on anybody that does that, but in my opinion, that is not the way to run this tube. The way to run this tube is the way he's got it set up, screen driven. Pick your output that you want to put into it, your input that you want to put into it rather, and stick with it, and this amp will be by your side for a long time. Obviously, nothing is indestructible, but these things are very, very close. So that's it, everybody. I hope to do a actual demonstration on it here soon. Dual 4cx800, brand new tubes. Basically brand new on the inside. Joe the Grinder built. Again, not a lot of his amps come up for sale. He's doing them kind of as he wants anymore. He does some for people here and there. And then, you know, most folks that have his amps, they don't come up for sale much, and when they do, they don't last long. So, nice amp, everybody. Appreciate it. Questions, comments, shoot me a text, 423-299-3535. As always, check out the website, roostercb.com. Catch you guys out there. Rooster in Tennessee. See you, bye.